David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
So yesterday I explained to you that while Donald Trump was complaining that the Federal Reserve didn't give him the big federal funds rate cut that he wanted, he was deliberately ignoring that from August 1st on, his additional tariffs on China have really been hurting the stock market. And yesterday when we were producing the show, I said, as of right now, the stock market, the Dow, is down nearly 600 points, and it ended down more than 700 points, the worst day in 2019 so far. And the reason is Donald Trump's trade war, which includes now China devaluing its currency, which I'll talk about momentarily. And it is getting worse and worse. This is going to be terrible for Americans of all kinds. There are all sorts of moralistic arguments we can make about China and their behavior. But in the end, this is bad for Americans. Now the Dow is down nearly 6% just this month. It's August 6th, mind you, through August 5th, which we had 2 weekend trading days, or rather 2 weekend days that were not trading days, down nearly 6%. The Dow back down roughly to where it was in January of 2018, which is 19 months ago. S&P 500 down about 3% yesterday. NASDAQ down even more, 3.5%. So this is bad. And it's bad even for people who don't necessarily own lots of shares of stock, as I've described before. And you know what? China is going to keep messing with Donald Trump now that Donald Trump has declared trade war on China, a type of war, nevertheless. China has now allowed the yuan, their currency, to weaken beyond 7 yuan per dollar for the first time in 10 years. And Donald Trump is attacking them on Twitter, saying, quote, China dropped the price of their currency to an almost a historic low. It's called currency manipulation. Are you listening, Federal Reserve? This is a major violation which will greatly weaken China over time. Really get the feeling that Trump has China on the ropes, right? Like any second, China's going to relent and come to the table and give Donald Trump everything he wants. Yeah, obviously not. And it's important to understand this currency manipulation allegation, which is not untrue, by the way. China does manipulate the value of their currency for trade benefit purposes. By reducing the value of their currency, it makes it cheaper for other countries to buy stuff from China to import to their countries. If you get more yuan per dollar, you can now get more Chinese stuff per dollar, effectively making it cheaper. That's true. And it's not going to change the way that Donald Trump has been handling Chinese trade policy. It's having the predicted effect, which is that it's crashing out our stock markets. And in more bad news for the United States, China has asked state-owned companies to just stop buying agricultural imports from the United States altogether. So if you thought that American farmers had been getting crushed for the last 9 months, and they have been, as I've told you about, that has been nothing compared to what you are about to see upcoming. This isn't sustainable, but more importantly, Trump doesn't even understand how this stuff works. Trump's policy, to the extent you can call it policy, is driven by misunderstandings about the most fundamental elements of trade and economics and currency, combined with this attitude that he has of everything being a win-lose negotiation and who's the strongest and who's going to come out on top. Trump's so-called business experience, which was the reason that many people voted for the guy to begin with, his business experience, we were told, would translate really well to being president. And we knew that that was a joke. Anyone who had any common sense knew that was a joke. Trump's business experience is daddy gave you money to get started. Everyone around you was constantly brown-nosing, and you just ignored all the rules all the time while bossing people around. Things are different now. Yes, Trump, what hasn't changed is Trump has still surrounded himself with the brown-nosing sycophants. That's the same as when Trump was in business, but Trump has tried taking the same sort of attitude with China, and China is not, some concrete or steel company that Trump has over a barrel. This is not looking good, period, no matter your political affiliation, and that's what I hope people understand. It doesn't matter whether you're for or against abortion. This is bad, bad, bad. There's no sign of it getting better, particularly when the president sees it all as sport, wins and losses, without even understanding what the definition of winning actually is. It's going to get even worse, unfortunately. One of the real downsides to having a president like Donald Trump that throws so many norms and conventions to the wind and acts in the childish, immature, and erratic way that he does is that it can help normalize or rehabilitate former presidents who also did things that aren't particularly good. And I've been really careful to avoid this with George W. Bush. So for the last 2.5 years, when I've pointed out, wow, Trump is going beyond even the craziness of George W. Bush in many ways, I'm always sort of careful to remind you that we don't want to incorrectly rehabilitate George W. Bush's image. Bush was a terrible, ignorant neocon war hawk as a president, but he had some common decency in some basic human ways that Donald Trump just completely lacks. And in the same way, I had many disagreements with Barack Obama on policy during the 8 years of Barack Obama's presidency. Obama's escalation of the drone war, Obama's war on whistleblowers, Obama's inability to make real progress on immigration, Obama starting from too meek a position on healthcare reform. There's a very long list of disagreements I had on policy with Barack Obama. But Barack Obama was an intelligent, thoughtful, and to my belief, fundamentally genuine person to the extent that you can know those characteristics about a person when you see them through the media and through their actions as president of the United States. And Barack Obama recently wrote a letter in response to the shootings in El Paso and in Dayton, Ohio. And it is just a glaring reminder of what we're lacking right now, which is a president who behaves like an adult. And Donald Trump couldn't take it and was so triggered by Barack Obama that even though Obama didn't mention him in his letter, Trump immediately took to Twitter to insult Barack Obama. Now, this is no Obama love letter, okay? It's just something that reminded me of what we've lost with Donald Trump as president. Let's take a look at the letter, which most importantly for me, points out some of the obvious things that a president should be saying, but Donald Trump is not. Obama saying, quote, "Michelle and I grieve with all the families in El Paso and Dayton who endured these latest mass shootings. Even if details are still emerging, there are a few things we already know to be true. First, no other nation on earth comes close to experiencing the frequency of mass shootings that we see in the United States. No other developed nation tolerates the levels of gun violence that we do. Every time this happens, we're told that tougher gun laws won't stop all murders, that they won't stop every deranged individual from getting a weapon and shooting innocent people in public places. But the evidence shows that they can stop some killings. They can save some families from heartbreak. We are not helpless here. And until all of us stand up and insist on holding public officials accountable for changing our gun laws, these tragedies will keep happening. Second, while the motivations behind these shootings may not yet be fully known, there are indications that the El Paso shooting follows a dangerous trend. Troubled individuals who embrace racist ideologies and see themselves obligated to act violently to preserve white supremacy. Like the followers of ISIS and other foreign terrorist organizations, these individuals may act alone, but they've been radicalized by white nationalist websites that proliferate on the internet. That means that both law enforcement agencies and internet platforms need to come up with better strategies to reduce the influence of these hate groups. But just as important, all of us have to send a clarion call and behave with the values of tolerance and diversity that should be the hallmark of our democracy. We should soundly reject language coming out of the mouths of any of our leaders that feeds a climate of fear and hatred or normalizes racist sentiments. Leaders who demonize those who don't look like us or suggest that other people, including immigrants, threaten our way of life, or refer to other people as subhuman, or imply that America belongs to just one certain type of people. Such language isn't new. It's been at the root of most human tragedy throughout history here in America and around the world. It's at the root of slavery and Jim Crow, the Holocaust, the genocide in Rwanda, and ethnic cleansing in the Balkans. It has no place in our politics and our public life. And it's time for the overwhelming majority of Americans of goodwill, of every race and faith and political party, to say as much clearly and unequivocally. This is just obvious context that's missing when we hear Republicans and Trump talk about this. No other country has these gun violence problems. No other country has the resistance caused by stupid but well-funded talking points that we do. And secondly, whether it's ISIS or these right-wing terrorists, it's the same mechanism of radicalization, and we have to call it out as such, and we have to call it terrorism in all cases. And by the way, just dripping from the letter is actual empathy and consolation for people, something that Donald Trump seems fundamentally just unable to achieve, instead having the instincts of going to Puerto Rico after a hurricane and shooting rolls of paper towels like basketballs, like a game. And Donald Trump was so triggered by this letter, which doesn't even mention him by name, that he immediately went to Twitter to insult Barack Obama with a quote from Fox and Friends, quoting Brian Kilmeade on Fox and Friends, saying, "Did George Bush ever condemn President Obama after Sandy Hook? President Obama had 32 mass shootings during his reign. Not many people said Obama's out of control. Mass shootings were happening before the president even thought about running for president." Now, there's a number of problems with that, including that there have been hundreds and hundreds of mass shootings under Donald Trump. But more importantly, Obama didn't even mention Trump in his letter, and Obama was trying to make changes which he couldn't get done, as simple as background checks. And this goes to Donald Trump's insecurity more than anything else. And there's two sides to this. On the one hand, just being able to speak and write in complete sentences distinguishes Barack Obama from Donald Trump in really important ways. But the substance of the letter is also something that Donald Trump is unwilling or unable to put together. I've said before, money can't buy class. It's never been more clear than right now. But the problem is that the longer Trump is in office, the longer that this becomes more and more okay. It shouldn't be startling to us to see, oh, a president that can speak coherently and isn't personally attacking political enemies on Twitter and is thinking big picture about social and political issues. It does surprise us. It's notable, even for me and for people in our audience. Trump has been normalized to a great degree, and every day that he's in office becomes more normal in a sense. There has to be a purge that's bigger than just getting rid of Trump. Having people like Jared and Ivanka in positions of power has been normalized. Having advisors like Kellyanne Conway has been normalized. Treating our allies with disrespect as some show of manhood has been normalized. It all has to be purged. It only starts with getting Trump out in November of 2020. Let me know what you think. I'm on Twitter at @DPakman. The show is on Twitter at David Pakman Show.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Today's new members of the day are Annie Law and Lonnie Smith. Thanks to both of you for being supporters of the David Pakman Show. Also want to say thanks to Derek France, who is today's longtime sustaining member of the day. Join them and support us directly at www.joinpakman.com. Donald Trump, once again, as he often does, gave one of these strange teleprompter sort of coma speeches where he looks visibly confused by the words on the prompter, which, by the way, still doesn't keep him on message, and jumped directly on the Republican bandwagon of the last 48 hours of blaming video games for violence in the real world. I played clips for you yesterday from Fox News, Texas Lieutenant Governor, and a Republican Congressman, Kevin McCarthy, blaming video games for shootings, blaming the violence within those games for making people go out and commit shootings in the real world. And I told you yesterday, they are united behind this talking point because they don't want to take responsibility or acknowledge Donald Trump's own rhetoric and their fear-mongering about immigrants for year after year after year, for being at least partially responsible for shootings and violent acts that we've seen of late. Here is Donald Trump jumping on the bandwagon, bringing up video games.
Second, we must stop the glorification of violence in our society. This includes the gruesome and grisly video games that are now commonplace. It is too easy today for troubled youth to surround themselves with a culture that celebrates violence. We must stop or substantially reduce this, and it has to begin immediately.
Ethan Klein from the H3 podcast reminded us of this clip which is just one example. In this one, Donald Trump joking and sort of playing around with the idea of violence against immigrants to stop them from coming to the United States. Check out this clip, and there are many of these.
But how do you stop these people? You can't. There's no... That's only in the panhandle you can get away with that statement. Only in the panhandle.
That type of thing is far more responsible for real world violence than video games. We know this. And before we get back to the main topic here, Donald Trump also mistakenly referring to the Toledo shooting yesterday instead of Dayton. The shooting, of course, was not in Toledo. It was in Dayton. And you'll notice in this clip, Trump's strange sniffing is back. His mush mouth speech is back. There's something very odd about this.
If we are able to pass great legislation after all of these years, we will ensure that those who were attacked will not have died in vain. May God bless the memory of those who perished in Toledo. And may God protect them. May God protect all of those from Texas to Ohio. May God bless the victims and their families. May God bless America. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Weird that this happens even when using a teleprompter. Who knows? The White House has retroactively removed Trump's mention of Toledo from the official White House transcript of the speech. So anyway, they're jumping on the video game bandwagon. And I told you yesterday, and I will remind you, other countries have video games. They have atheists. They have mental illness. They have all the things that we have that are often blamed for shootings. Usually they have fewer guns, but they have no or almost no mass shootings the way that we do. So this is a planned, coordinated talking point distraction. How does Japan have almost no gun deaths despite having just explosive video game usage? It is not beyond, we can now say, to say it a different way, it is beyond any doubt that the anti-immigrant rhetoric of this president is having an effect. And the debate is over what level of an effect is it having. And the right has done two things. One is they've gotten on this video game bandwagon. The other is to finally have Donald Trump mention white supremacy during his speech. And now Trump has actually said he condemns white supremacy, a white supremacist, which I commend him for. I do, to the extent that I believe it. But why did he not condemn it when white supremacists endorsed him in 2015? Why did he play coy with it back then and during 2016 in his campaign? What about after Charlottesville? Why has it taken this long for Trump to finally say it? We know why, because he's been resisting it, and now he's saying it because he almost has no choice. They are up against the wall here. The shooter mentioned Trump in his manifesto. Fox News talked about a troubled young man who had a manifesto, which they won't tell us the details of, as Republicans all go on national television and radio and talk about video games. This is what's called BS. And I don't even think that they realize they're sort of inadvertently pushing for an anti-free speech regulation of the content of video games, which they're normally opposed to. Understand that if the full conclusion of video games are to blame is actually grasped as the cause here, at the tail end of that, it's telling video game makers what can or can't be part of the video games that they make, which is fundamentally the opposite of what Republicans have been advocating for along the lines of free speech and censorship all this time. There was a movement in the 90s about video games and violence. And to be clear, I really want to make sure people know this. I don't deny that there are effects of violence in media to study. This includes news of crimes on the news, reports of crimes on the news, better said, violence in movies, violence in video games. But pretending now that the connection is violence in video games causes people to commit mass shootings on the basis of white nationalist anti-immigrant beliefs, that's just despicable. And the most shameful part of it is that they pretend that the point of the guns that people own is everything but committing violent acts. Guns are for hunting. Guns are for self-defense. Guns are for the craft of cleaning them and understanding them. They're for target practice. Guns are for everything other than violence. There's no connection to violence. But the video games That's where the violence is, and video games are now a matter of life and death. Truly disgusting, and they may well get away with it because no heinous act, we know this, no heinous act will get the gun fetishists to reconsider their point of view. They know this, and that's why they're hopping on this video game talking point bandwagon now, and it may well work. There's something absolutely hilarious going on that is taking over the life of Republican Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell, and it's the nickname Moscow Mitch. The nickname Moscow Mitch is sticking to McConnell like bad ideas stick to Republicans, and he just cannot get away from it. Now, the reason he's being called Moscow Mitch, there are actually numerous reasons. One is that he keeps blocking every single election security bill that's meant to prevent foreign interference in our elections, including from countries like Russia, which we know interfered in 2016. And over the weekend, a crowd chanting Moscow Mitch to Mitch McConnell so loudly that it drowned him out for a significant portion of the audience. This was at some kind of picnic event in Fancy Farm, Kentucky, and it was hilarious. The mics are close to McConnell here, so you'll hear McConnell, but you'll start to hear the chanting coming from the back.
We've hit and sustained the lowest unemployment rate in Kentucky's recorded history, and there are far more open jobs than people looking for work nationwide. Of the top four congressional leaders, I'm the only one not from New York or California. I'm the guy that sticks up for Middle America and for Kentucky. I saved the Supreme Court.
I just love it. McConnell increasingly struggling to be heard over the Moscow Mitch chanting. The Hill TV host and political consultant, Crystal Ball, was at this event and posted video to her social media that she took, and she's a little bit further back in the crowd. You can't even hear McConnell back there because of the Moscow Mitch chants.
I'm the guy that sticks up for Middle America and for Kentucky. I saved the Supreme Court for a generation by blocking President Obama's nominees and led the way for Neil Gorsuch and Brett Kavanaugh. Now Washington liberals
It is absolutely delightful that this is catching on, and it should catch on given what he's done. He's blocked the Duty to Report Act, which would require presidential campaigns to report to the FBI offers of assistance from foreign countries, something Donald Trump recently said, yeah, I don't know, I would take the help in 2020 from China or Russia. I don't know if I'd actually report it to the FBI. There was a bill that would require that reporting. McConnell blocked it. McConnell blocked the Securing America's Federal Elections Act, which has been passed by the House. It would direct $600 million in election assistance to states and require paper backup ballots. There was a bipartisan bill which would have required companies like Facebook and Google to disclose who is buying political ads in order to suss out foreign influence. McConnell blocked that. There was a bipartisan bill to ease cooperation between state election officials and federal intel agencies. McConnell blocked it. McConnell blocked a bipartisan bill imposing sanctions on entities that attack a U.S. election. McConnell blocked a bipartisan bill with new sanctions on Russia for its cyber crimes. And it's been one after another. And here is the sort of segue that I think is the most important one for us here. Moscow Mitch has an opponent in 2020, Amy McGrath. Moscow Mitch could be removed in 2020 from his Senate seat. Moscow Mitch isn't that popular in Kentucky. His opponent is someone you can support and is someone that you can donate to. It's Amy McGrath. Look her up. I've talked about her before. There is an opportunity here to remove, in addition to Ted Cruz, one of the most disgusting members of the U.S. Senate. But unlike Ted Cruz, McConnell has been much more effective and efficient at actually getting really horrible things done for the Republican Party. Hey, if you want to see hilarious hate mail that I got, follow me on Instagram at david.pakman. I posted it there this morning. And while you're there, follow The David Pakman Show as well on Instagram at David Pakman Show. Let's take a quick break. So much more to talk about right after this.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
Hey, this may be the best video I've ever seen of Beto O'Rourke. As you know, Beto failed bigly at the first Democratic debates, and he has no chance of being the Democratic nominee. But that doesn't mean all hope is gone. He finally showed some signs of life in the last 48 hours when he was asked about Donald Trump's rhetoric being connected to the recent shootings. And Beto O'Rourke, who is normally subdued and not necessarily super inspired or high energy, immediately high energy, and I love it. Let's take a look.
Is there anything in your mind that the president can do now to make this any better?
What do you think? You know that he's been saying? He's been calling Mexican immigrants rapists and criminals. I don't know, like, members of the press, what the hold on a second. You know, it's these questions that you know the answers to. I mean, connect the dots about what he's been doing in this country. He's not tolerating racism. He is promoting racism. He's not tolerating violence. He's inciting racism and violence in this country. So, you know, I don't know what kind of question that is.
Good for him, truly. And then he appeared on ABC's This Week, also bringing the energy.
You've said that the president is fueling hate in this country. Are you suggesting that he bears responsibility for what we just saw in El Paso?
I am, because he does. Someone who describes Mexican immigrants as rapists and criminals, who has sought to ban all Muslims, all people of one religion, from traveling to the United States.
And then here's Beto on MSNBC's Morning Joe, even more fired up.
I mean, the president has not been shy. He's not been saying this behind closed doors. This is out in the open. You know, all people of one religion, inherently defective and should be banned from the shores of this country. The only modern Western democracy that I can think of that said anything close to this is the Third Reich, Nazi Germany. Talking about human beings as though they are animals, making them subhuman to make it okay to put their kids in cages. We've lost 7 children in our custody just over the last year in this, the wealthiest, the most powerful country on the face of the planet, saying that he wants more immigrants like those from Nordic countries, the whitest places on the face of the planet. This president, his open is also an invitation to violence. We've seen a rise in hate crimes every single one of the last 3 years. So, Joe, you're absolutely right. The writing has been on the wall since his maiden speech coming down that escalator describing Mexican immigrants as rapists and criminals. The actions that follow cannot surprise us.
Seriously, like with no sarcasm whatsoever, good for Beto. He has no shot at being the Democratic nominee. He's got some strange things in his delivery. He can often get himself sort of confused about his own answers, but he would be a great senator. I wish, as I've said before, that he would leave the presidential race and try to knock off John Cornyn in Texas, who's up for re-election in 2020. Not particularly popular. And imagine replacing a Republican red state senator with Beto O'Rourke. That would be a really good use of Beto O'Rourke's time and fundraising power. Beto is actually really good when he does what he did here. He just says what he's thinking. He's not rehearsed. He's not doing campaign talking points. He might actually even be doing better in the Democratic nomination field if instead of doing that thing where he pauses to think and he's trying to, seeming to want to answer for himself, what am I supposed to say here? If he just said what he felt, this actually, if you think back to 2008, it sort of happened with John McCain. Much of what gave John McCain his favorability in 2008 and in the lead up to participating in the general election after winning the Republican primary was he was thought of as a maverick, whether it's true or not, but that was the perception. He said what he thought. It didn't feel calculated. And even if you disagreed with a lot of what he said, it felt like genuine McCain. But then as McCain became the general election Republican nominee against Barack Obama, he sort of went into that talking point, robotic, answers feel calculated sort of thing, and he lost a lot of his appeal. Beto is at his best when he's passionate and off the cuff and just channels the voice of the average voter against the fiasco of the Trump era, period. This is not what he's been doing at campaign events. This is not what Beto's been doing at presidential debates. The poll numbers reflect that he's doing absolutely terribly. He gets called unhinged by right-wingers. That's to be expected for this impassioned rant. But who cares? Truly, this Beto, this angry Beto, this is the most likable Beto that I've ever seen. And I still think that there is something to explore there in going back to Texas and running against John Cornyn, who's up for re-election in 2020. Good for Beto. He's emotional. He's not unhinged. And he's right to be emotional given what's going on. You probably are not going to be shocked by what I am going to tell you today, or at least not surprised. But this is a major, major scandal, and it is not getting the attention that it deserves. A top climate scientist has quit the USDA and claims that the Trump administration is burying climate research data. Again, not surprising, but a major scandal, which may not even rank given everything that's going on right now. His name is Lewis Ziska. He's a leading climate change scientist. He has a study published in Science Advances, it's a journal, which says that more carbon dioxide in the atmosphere causes rice to lose nutrients, okay? Understand the implications. Climate change literally makes food less nutritious. You would think that the USDA, A being agriculture, would immediately be activating around this because 600 million people on the planet depend on rice to get enough calories. Ziska has now gone public that the Trump administration questioned his findings and tried to minimize media coverage of this study. This is not a unique claim from Ziska. Politico did an investigation and they found that a whole bunch of government employees have actually lost their jobs over climate change disagreements with the Trump administration, and that the USDA is regularly doing this. They're regularly burying research that is not favorable to Donald Trump's view of climate change, which, by the way, is a topic Trump knows nothing about, but has no shortage of opinions on. The right loves to talk about who isn't getting to be heard. They talk about the suppression of speech. They blame us on the left for limiting speech and suppressing speech. They totally misunderstand what the First Amendment is and what free speech and censorship even mean. And here we have scientists doing science being silenced for political reasons. Even the Trump administration is in a position here where they are not just suppressing speech, they're doing even more to hurt climate research. 550 federal workers at the USDA were told, hey, you know what? We're going to move the office from Washington, D.C. to Kansas City, a place that a lot of people who live in Washington, D.C. don't want to go, with peace and love and all due respect to Kansas City, uprooting countless families. And of course, a lot of the people who have worked for the USDA for a long time are quitting. And who do you think they're going to be replaced by? People that the new USDA under Trump wants to hire. There have been lots of horrible things happening long before Trump, obviously, but we're now seeing this sort of sinister amalgamation of the worst instincts combined with the worst people, combined with the worst ideas, combined with a complete lack of morality and extreme greed. And this is where they're going with it. They aren't just trying to suppress science and real research on the climate. They are doing it. They are succeeding at doing it. And it's not as salacious or headline grabbing as a lot of the other stuff that too many people are spending their time on. So a lot of people don't even realize that this is happening. And the effect is irreversible in many ways and sickening. And so I'm doing my part to try to let you know that this is going on. I understand that the more salacious headlines will continue to get more attention. Corporate media is unlikely to talk about this. But for the side that claims they are the victims of the suppression of speech and facts, they are doing a hell of a lot of that suppression themselves. Make sure that you are following The David Pakman Show on Twitch at twitch.tv/David Pakman. I hope you'll join me Wednesday evening at 6:30 p.m. Eastern for a live Twitch stream. And if you have an Amazon Prime subscription, you can subscribe to Twitch Prime for free. It costs you nothing, but it counts as a paid subscription for us. All of that at twitch.tv/David Pakman. I hope you'll check it out.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Hey, this is interesting. I've talked before about a tool called the defeasibility test that can be a useful tool when we're talking about politics. And I first heard about it, I believe, from Peter Boghossian. And then I learned about some other versions of it from others. And the idea is to interject and sort of slow down a conversation that might be going nowhere or where you're not likely to make any progress by asking what evidence would make you change your position. So if we were debating abortion, for example, I might say to someone who is an anti-choicer against abortion, what evidence, if I could present it to you, would get you to change your mind about this issue? And they might say, well, if you could prove a fetus isn't a person, or they might say, if I learned God didn't exist, then I might change my mind about abortion. It's not so much about what the answer is specifically, but about getting them to think, like, is there actually something that would change your mind, or are you irrationally tied to this idea? Are you tied to this idea not because of anything factual, so evidence doesn't even really matter? That's the sort of gist of the defeasibility test. And CNN host John Berman ran the defeasibility test on former Trump communications director Anthony Scaramucci. And Scaramucci completely imploded in the sense that he rambled for minute after minute after minute, not answering the question. The question was, what could Trump do to make you, Anthony Scaramucci, stop supporting him? And look at how long, like, I'm not even going to play it all because it goes on so long. Look at how long Scaramucci just rambles on without actually answering the question here.
As we sit here this morning, do you still support President Trump?
Yeah, of course I support. Hey, John, I'm a very loyal guy. Remember, I got fired 2 years ago.
Loyalty is one thing, but the question is, Anthony, then, if the answer is yes, do you still support the president this morning? What would it take?
I understand that.
What would it take for you
to
stop supporting the president?
I think he's going in a direction, and I said this a couple of weeks ago on your air, he's going in a direction where there's a very large group of people that actually want to support him, that are actually begging him to give us reasons to support you. He's going in a direction where I guess he doesn't want that support, or he wants people to have this twisted like a pretzel loyalty test with him, where he's going to do things that are not making any sense. But I want you to go out there and sort of defend it, okay? And so I think there's a large group of people that are going to stop doing that. And then eventually people are going to say, look, I'm sorry, the value system and the rhetoric does not outweigh the policies, okay? And so at some point that will happen, and has not happened for me yet, but there's a lot of us out here. It's not just me. I'm a little bit more vocal, perhaps a tinge more courageous to admit it. But trust me, it's former White House administration officials, it's former cabinet members, it's former people in the American military. It's not just me. It's not like I'm the only one. I may be the only one saying it, but trust me, there's a very large group of people. If he keeps it up, they'll say, okay, the policies, they're great, but you know what? This sort of rhetoric and this sort of disunity sort of stuff is overpowering the policies.
So Scaramucci has no answer. He just repeated that confusing thing over and over again, and he's reduced to sort of a blubbering and stuttering mess. Really nicely done by John Berman. Not that it's that complex of a technique. You just say, oh, what would get you to change your mind about that? Now, it's common that in many situations, if you ask this to someone, what evidence, if I could present it to you, would change your mind? Very often people don't immediately have an answer, but sometimes, again, the point is not to have an answer, but to get the person thinking about whether they are blindly or irrationally attached to a position. For lots of these Trumpists, the answer actually is to this question, nothing. Nothing would get them to reconsider their support for Donald Trump. I had a funny caller, must have been maybe like a year ago, might have even been a year and a half ago on the show, a big Trumpist who started by saying, to me on the phone, if Trump doesn't build the wall during his first term, he doesn't have my support in 2020. And within about a minute, I said much more concretely, so you said if Trump does not build the wall before 2020, you don't vote for him in 2020. Is that right? And the Trumpist on the phone immediately started hedging and saying, well, I mean, it depends on why he doesn't build it. If he doesn't build it because Democrats get in the way, then that's different. It sort of depends. And then we very quickly figured out, actually, there really wasn't anything that would stop him from voting for Trump in 2020, because any failure of Trump or apparent failure of Trump, he was going to, after the fact, attribute blame for to someone else. In the case of the wall, it was going to be Democrats. So this is a really good question for exposing dogmatic ideologues. And then another one that can be productive. This one, my friend Jay Tomlinson, host of the Best of the Left podcast, told me about this one. Why do you think I hold this position on a particular issue? So it's much harder for people to say your position is basically because you're a moron that you've come to this conclusion, or you're a bad person. When you're starting to have a conversation about an issue, you actually say to someone, okay, let's talk about healthcare. You know my position. Before we start talking about it, why do you think I have the position I have about healthcare? And it is much more difficult for people to attribute bad faith when you actually say to them, tell me how you think I arrived at my conclusion. If you've had success with either or both of these techniques, let me know, maybe during live calls later on this week. I would love to hear from folks who have actually tried out some of these tactics. Hey, this is kind of interesting. So a couple weeks ago, I told you that for a while, I've been mulling over how could we introduce a Spanish language version of the David Pakman Show into the online political milieu, so to speak. The idea being there's lots of people in the United States whose English is not good enough to really take in political content like the normal English language version of the David Pakman Show. So if there was some way to do a version of the David Pakman Show in Spanish, we would be reaching a completely new audience. Now, it's not practical. I don't have the time in the day, in the literal sense, to do the entire show over in my native language of Spanish, remembering, of course, that I was born in Argentina and learned English as a second language. So one idea that I presented a couple of weeks ago was doing a computer, like an automated computer overdub of the show in a computerized Spanish voice. And the problem was it sounded pretty unnatural. Let me play a little bit of that for you just to remind you.
Fue un fin de semana realmente loco, fuera de la Casa Blanca. Donald Trump sufrió una fusión extraña por una historia del Washington Post sobre tweets y les hizo enviar tweets aún más locos. Así que el sábado, The Washington Post escribió sobre los tweets racistas de Donald Trump el domingo. Casi como un día más tarde, Trump pasó su mañana perdiendo la cabeza por el Washington publicar historia. Y uno de los temas de ese artículo del Washington Post.
So I asked for feedback on that, and the feedback was almost unanimous. I mean, I can't think of any time when feedback has been so overwhelmingly united on anything. People were overwhelmingly positive about the idea of a Spanish version of the David Pakman Show, but the consensus was that auto-dub technology is not the way to do it. It's just not dynamic enough. It doesn't sound anything like the program or like me with dynamics in my speech. So I tabled it because the alternative is to get a real person to dub every day what we're doing. That's expensive, it's a ton of work, and maybe it's outside of our scope. Cut to this week when a Reddit user and a viewer of the show actually did a real dub of a David Pakman Show clip. Now, the time it took is crazy. It took him 4 hours for like a 2 or 3 minute clip. But it's actually really good. So take a look at this, take a listen. This isn't even, it's sort of funnier in a sense because this was a voicemail segment from the Eggman, and he translates Eggman as hombre huevo, literally Eggman. I mean, that's a literal translation. I just don't know why I find that hilariously endearing. We'll play just a little bit of this. Take a listen.
Tenemos un número de correo de voz. Ese número es 219 David P. Este mensaje de voz es del hombre huevo. Ahora, necesito darles algunos antecedentes. El hombre huevo vive en un área rural al norte del estado de Nueva York y nos ha dicho antes que vive en un área de ingresos relativamente bajos y que vive en un área bastante conservadora y que trabaja principalmente con conservadores. Y él dejó un mensaje de voz explicando que la forma en que se llevan a cabo las conversaciones sobre cómo suben las primas de atención médica y sus compañeros de trabajo y las personas que lo rodean culpan a Obamacare, lo cual por supuesto no tiene sentido y les diré un segundo por qué.
I love it. I truly have no idea how we could make this a thing, but I think it does have potential. The reality is, professional daily dubbing of the entire show would be, I think, extraordinarily expensive. The idea is not to fill our current channel with Spanish language content, but my thought was to create, the David Pakman Show in Spanish and to have Spanish versions of our clips there. Also, part of why this is funny to me is that me being from Argentina, my Spanish accent is so different from this viewer who's from somewhere not Argentina or Uruguay. They don't sound like they're from Spain. I can't quite place the accent. It doesn't sound Puerto Rican or Dominican, but it could be anything from Mexico to Colombia or Venezuela, something like that. That's also just kind of funny to me, although I guess it'd be less funny to people who don't speak Spanish. Anyway, let me know what you think about this. I think it is a very, very cool idea. I think like the dream would be someone in Argentina can give us some really great rate on dubbing the entire day's clips. So it would be in an Argentinian accent, maybe because of the exchange rate, it would be more affordable. I don't know. In any case, I really appreciate this one clip being dubbed, and a really, really nice job. If you have other ideas for what we might be able to do on this, let me know. I think that there is value. And listen, this is not just, I think, to be very clear, I actually think that the value of doing this type of content in Spanish, but for American politics, is that we could really be reaching an entire new audience that doesn't feel like they have content like this, that is in their wheelhouse linguistically based on the level at which they do or maybe don't speak English. So there's tons of programs in Argentina in Spanish about Argentinian politics. There's tons of programs in Mexico in Spanish about Mexican politics. But my idea is that this is really an untapped market. I don't know that any of the other progressive online shows are even thinking about this. I'm thinking about it because I'm an immigrant from Argentina. And I talk to so many people all the time, just people I meet out in the world who would love to be following American politics in Spanish from a progressive perspective, but there is not as much available as maybe they would like. So I'm actually seeing this as an activism tool in addition to just being kind of interesting and different. We have a voicemail number. That number is 219-2-DAVID-P. Now, there are people who like the David Pakman Show intro theme song, and there are people who don't like the David Pakman Show intro theme song. What I have for you today is a candidate for replacing our current theme song. A viewer called in who has just a beautiful, beautiful voice and sang what could be a replacement David Pakman Show theme song for us. Let's take a listen and let me know if you like this better than what we're currently using.
The David Pakman Show, it's my favorite show. You do more good than you know. The David Pakman Show.
Yeah. So listen, in all seriousness, if someone can make either like an EDM or a dubstep remix of that, to quote Donald Trump from when he asked Russia to hack Hillary's emails, I think you would be greatly rewarded for that with audience karma, so to speak. Please, please, please consider, if you have the skills, and I know that many people in our audience do, consider doing an EDM or dubstep remix of that and send it to me. I would love it, and I think it would definitely make its way onto the show. On today's bonus show, we are going to talk about what Texas is doing to gun laws right after we've had more mass shootings, including one in Texas. What they are doing is, as you have a whole bunch of people in the country who want to tighten up gun laws as a result of the mass shootings that we're having, Texas is actually set to loosen their gun laws, interestingly enough. So we'll talk about that on the bonus show. We will also talk about different daytime schedules. There's a new study which says that 1 in 300 people truly thrive on a very early to bed, very early to rise routine. Now, there are lots of people who have adopted that schedule, early to bed, early to rise, but you can't really say that they're thriving. In fact, it's really a struggle. 1 in 300 appear to actually thrive on that, and we'll talk about who they are. And then lastly, there's a lawmaker who wants to curb social media addiction with a new bill. And of course, there are questions about, is this nanny state liberals trying to control us? Is this suppression of speech of some kind? All of those things that you would anticipate are being discussed. We will talk about the text of the proposal. We will talk about its merits and much, much more. 2 ways to get access to the bonus show: become a member or become a patron. Become a member at www.joinpakman.com or become a patron at patreon.com/David Pakman Show. Both will give you instant access to the bonus show. And lastly, the newest thing we're doing, please follow me on Twitch at twitch.tv/David Pakman. Follow me there. We've built up almost 10,000 subscribers just in our first week on Twitch, which is unbelievable. And if you have an Amazon Prime membership, you can subscribe to Twitch Prime. Amazon owns Twitch for free, okay? It costs you nothing. Instead of you paying $5 a month, you pay nothing, but it counts as a paid subscription for us. So you can Google how to subscribe to Twitch Prime, and it's very easy. It takes almost no time, costs you nothing, and we get a little bit of money. So that's great stuff. I'll talk to you on the bonus show, and I will see you on my next Twitch live stream Wednesday at 6:30 p.m. Eastern Time.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.